Hello there, welcome to the channel. This is another unscripted ramble about Star Trek. It's not on any specific... I'll get to that. It's not on any specific episode or particular event. It's more just a sort of my thoughts and conversation piece spewed out for all of you to listen to. So, enjoy, I suppose. This particular episode is on warfare, which seems very clickbaity from whatever actual title I've given this episode, and probably is. But war in Star Trek is a pretty complicated thing, and I don't just mean tactically, or I've explored in previous episodes like how certain ships are utilized in war, how useless a fighter is realistically in most circumstances, except under very specific ones. How bigger ships are actually more useful. How different types of weapons are utilized. How different factions conduct wars. Something I've explored to some degree, one form or another, on this channel throughout the few years I've been running it. And all that's good information, but that's not what this is. This is war in and of itself, how it is treated within Star Trek from a sort of outside third-person perspective. Quite famously, Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, was very anti-war. He was a former police officer himself. Basically, he'd seen enough crap to, last a lifetime, and he wanted to show a perfect future, a better future. That's why in the original series and in Next Generation, although there is combat and there is violence, it's always limited to outside threats. He basically puts the violence and the danger in the camp of the other guy, in the Romulans camp, in the Borg camp, in the Klingons camp, wherever. Humanity is shown to be more evolved, almost arguably to be not the human race we know and understand ourselves to be, but shown through the lens of what we wish we could be. It wasn't until he passed away that Deep Space Nine was created, and that began the sort of baby steps towards Star Trek having a slightly more grittier, somewhat more realistic stance on humanity and the future. And it can't all be rosy. Quite famously, the organization Section 31, which is not strictly speaking a military organization, some people believe it should be erased from canon. I personally don't. I love the idea of Section 31 and understand what Sloan meant when he said, in order for people like Bashir, idealists, to exist within the Federation, there has to be people like him making sure that they can exist, that they can have those ideals, because the universe is not forgiving, and it never will be. Not every race is going to be nice. They're not all going to play by the rules. The Cardassians note that humans have rules of war, rules that make winning the war a lot more difficult. Now that's a very debatable statement. I don't actually agree with that one, but it's a very Cardassian statement. But that said, many humans share that similar philosophy. Roddenberry wanted to portray humanity as a beacon of society, a beacon of light, and better than what they are now, and showing that we can be greater. And that is a wonderful idea. But practically, there will always be sociopaths, there'll always be psychopaths, there'll always be killers and people that want more than what they have and are willing to do whatever it takes to get the things that they want from other people that have earned them. Basically utilizing violence to achieve their means because it is a shortcut. It's human nature. You're always going to have people that wish to dominate others, people that wish to conquer. Humans are a very tribal people. It's simply a fact. And as a result of this, throughout the years, Star Trek has become darker. Now, some people see this as a negative. I don't personally, because I actually think overall the Federation still represents a more positive, balanced view, not only of humanity, but on the potential of taking that concept of bettering ourselves and others and exporting it to a wider interspecies alliance and embracing the differing cultures, which is on a bigger scale a version of what Roddenberry believed we should do on Earth. Different religions, different cultures, different peoples. I am from Britain. Now, I do have ancestry that's not all from Britain, but pretty much I am British. Being British means I'm rather different to someone from, say, China, in my heritage, language, culture, religious beliefs, social beliefs, everything. But we're all people, which is the message in Star Trek, that whatever those differences are, they don't really matter. They're minor, they're insignificant, they're so irrelevant that we can easily overcome them despite what is thousands of years of social, cultural, linguistic difference between our societies. We can still overcome them and come together and go forward as one. Now, export that philosophy to the difference between, say, humans and Denobulans, and it's not just a few people separated by a few thousand years of cultural differences. It's people separated by hundreds of millions, if not billions of years of planetary evolution, not only social and cultural differences, but biological, evolutionary, everything on their world is different to ours, and has pressured them to become a completely different thing. But yet they've still reached a point where they are able to find points of commonality with us and with others and come together as a single unit, i.e. the United Federation of Planets. So how is war, getting round after my little tangent, how is war actually treated in Trek? As I said, from DS9 onwards, it begins to change, and quite famously Star Trek Deep Space Nine had the Dominion War, which was a massive multi-season long arc that showed that war was still a thing. Now, of course, it showed the aggressor being the other side. Now, I've played devil's advocate for this in the past and actually argued that the Federation, the Klingons and the Romulans, and the Cardassians for that matter, brought this on themselves, that they antagonized the Dominion. The Dominion certainly was the more belligerent power. Certainly the Dominion was morally less grey than, say, the Federation, Romulans or Klingons, and was overtly more aggressive. See, the Romulans and Klingons still have redeeming qualities from a human point of view. Romulans will ultimately become members of the Federation, so will the Klingons. Despite the aggressive nature of their cultures, Klingons have nobility and honour. Romulans have a sense of honour, a sense of right and wrong, and a sense of justice. All these things mean that humans can find some common ground with them, and so can the wider Federation. The Dominion didn't share these values on any level. And as a result, it's hard to find common ground with an entity like that. So yes, I do believe the Dominion was the worst power, but I don't believe they're entirely to blame for the entire Dominion War. So that was a story done in Deep Space Nine. Then we had the Xindi arc, quite famously in Star Trek Enterprise a few years later. Obviously this was set time chronologically a couple of hundred years before the Dominion War, but was a full year-long year of hell for Earth, and particularly for the crew of the NX-01. And it showed, once again, it's still putting the violence outside of humanity and humanity reacting to it and responding to it, but it also shows that humanity's culture being imposed on others in and of itself can be a form of aggression, a form of imperialism, with other characters within Star Trek often commenting on this, that the Federation is insidious, that if you get exposed to enough of it for long enough, you start to like it. So despite your own cultural beliefs and your own ways of doing things, you suddenly find that you are becoming something else, thanks to the influence of the Federation. That is, let's call it what it is, it's kind of colonialism. It's extrapolating what happened centuries ago during the age of colonialism and putting a friendlier face on it, but effectively accomplishing some of the same goals, and some of those goals are damaging to other cultures. Look at what the Federation was willing to do to the Baku. As Picard said, it violated the principles of the Federation. But sometimes the principles of the Federation are not great. But let's stick to less ambiguous statements like that. Let's go to the actual wars. Let's focus on a few specific instances, and I mean conflicts, not just skirmishes. How is war portrayed in Star Trek? Now, the first big one, of course, let's go chronologically, the Xindi conflict. Now, I have again explored this fairly extensively on the channel, but the Xindi were tricked into believing that humanity would wipe them out one day, and they had to destroy humanity first. They were deceived into this by transdimensional beings, and they built a weapon, basically a Death Star, and sent it at Earth to destroy it. Humanity was ultimately able to defuse the situation using logic and peace and reason, which is very much in the spirit of Star Trek. It took this human concept after many centuries of struggle and all the difficulties humans had gone through to get to where they were and unified as a people, to show the Xindi, the error of their ways, that they were being tricked, that they didn't need to be enemies, that creating something like the Planet Killer was a mistake and was just a bad idea. But there was a better way, and despite the overwhelming odds, despite the sheer ferocity of the Xindi, despite the technological differences, they were able to find peace, not using violence or conflict, despite some of them going in there wanting to take the gloves off and forget all this compassion and Prime Directive, early Prime Directive bullshit, and just kill the Xindi, make them pay. And I don't doubt there were many humans, as Terra Prime would show, that felt like this, that kept that sentiment going. And I don't doubt that many of those people would thrive on through the next few centuries. Another great war would be the Federation-Klingon War. This would probably be the major conflict, because there's the Earth-Romulan War, but I argue that the Earth-Romulan War is not really a war of the Federation. It is a war of humanity and the Romulans. There's got to be a reason to call it the Earth-Romulan War, which humanity was supported by its allies, but it was a proto-war for the Federation. The Federation-Klingon War, I think, was the first real war conducted by the Federation Starfleet and the Federation at large against a single enemy, that being the Klingon Empire. This showed that when the Klingons came together, they could do a lot of damage, that the Federation was unprepared, that their belief in science and peace doesn't always work, that when faced with a really belligerent power, Starfleet still needs to be prepared. But they were still able to resolve the situation with negotiation. But they had to resort to the Vulcan hello style of negotiation. And, sort of negotiation on the fly. Aggressive negotiations with the Klingons, basically going to their level. Not doing it from a human point of view, but from the human way of mirroring who they were talking to. Ultimately, they were able to less than gently persuade the Klingons to end the war. But if they hadn't have done, the Klingons were at Earth's doorstep. The war would have been over one way or another anyway, but it wouldn't have been in the Federation's favour. Even if the Federation survived in one form or another, Starfleet and Earth probably would not. That was a major war of the 23rd century. Now from then on, we enter the later eras where there's many minor conflicts with various different powers, including the Klingons again, including the Romulans again, and a variety of other peoples. Minor beginnings of a war with the Gorn, which never really takes off, a few shots fired, nothing more, and a few other engagements here and there in Pike's era and in Kirk's era, right up until the destruction of Praxis and the Klingon Empire, sort of, and the signing of the Khitomer Accords and the demilitarization. Again, showing that negotiation and peace and a bit of patience and basically willing to take sacrifice was a good thing. And long-term, peace is always for the better. Then we fast forward after the golden age of exploration and we get the Dominion War, which comes somewhat after the revelation of the existence of the Borg, which was again a minor conflict but not a true war. The Borg were never truly at war with the Federation. I think if they were, we'd have seen hundreds if not thousands, maybe even more cubes descend on the Federation. The Federation would have been blocked out of existence without any real fuss. I don't think I subscribe to the idea that the Borg are farming the galaxy, not actually trying to assimilate it. So then you get to the Dominion War in the 2370s, another major, more than interstellar conflict. This was a conflict that spanned 3 quadrants and involved probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different species on one level or another. More than just the major combatants. There was many other races involved in the periphery. This also came off the back of the Maquis conflict, which is a very interesting conflict which we'll circle back to in just a second. The Dominion was a dark reflection of the Federation, and its very existence was antithetical to the Federation. Although it was very similar in that it was a collection of races working together for common goal. That common goal was not the betterment of all, it was the betterment of one. With the Federation, common goal was the betterment of all members. And the Dominion, as a result, was, as I said, it was the bad guy, and the Federation is the good guy. But that doesn't mean that the Federation didn't provoke it. But the Dominion's tactics were brutal and savage, and it brought out that savagery in humanity. Even amongst great officers and experienced people like Sisko would he would stoop to levels he'd never think he'd stoop to. It brought to the surface Section 31 again that hadn't really been on the surface visibly, sort of an open secret like this, not in over 100 years. Something more like 130 years. So the Dominion War was a big shake-up for the Federation, a big slap in the face and a big wake-up. In addition to that conflict, though, we again circle back to the Maquis. The Maquis are an interesting case. They are, for the first time, perhaps, a visible showing that there were cracks in the Federation, that humanity had not evolved past its baser instincts, that not all problems have been solved, that our tribal nature still existed, that we build communities and we build societies, and we become very tribal with those people that we live with, and we were beyond the control of the Federation in a sense in that regard. And as a result, the Maquis thought to themselves, well, the Federation's betrayed us. We don't hate the Federation for that, but we do hate Cardassians for all that they're doing, and we get a terrorist organization, the Maquis. Yes, they do attack the Federation from time to time, but for the most part, the Maquis keep their anger and their aggression pointed solely at the Cardassians, and they're a very interesting case for the kind of war, because it's not a war conducted by the Federation. In fact, the Federation actively fights the Maquis, turns on its own citizenry to enforce this concept that peace and appeasement is always a better way. But there are many arguments to be made that the very existence of the Maquis pushed Cardassia closer to the arms of the Dominion, that if the Federation hadn't made these treaties and hadn't signed over this territory and hadn't betrayed its own citizens and had backed them up and forced the Cardassians back and forced them into a military capitulation rather than a diplomatic one, basically they were trying to create a new Khitomer Accord. Because I imagine there were a lot of people, as we know, on both sides of the line in space, in the Klingon Empire and in the Federation, that didn't like the conditions of the Khitomer Accords. That there were those who were dependent on them. There were other races likely who liked the idea that the Federation and the Klingons had hostilities. They were either selling weapons, profiting from the war in some way or another, or politically, like the Romulans, liked it to continue. The Federation, though, long term it worked out for both sides, for the Klingons and for the Federation. So they get to the border wars of the Cardassians, and they think to themselves, well, we can find magic in a bottle again. We'll do that again. So this was another attempt in a lot of ways to do that, but it backfired, because this time the people pushed back. Human nature won out, and we see for the first time, I felt, in Star Trek, them be brave enough to actually yes, they were still showing them in a sympathetic light sometimes, but for the most part, one man's hero is another man's terrorist. The Maquis were a bit of both, but for the first time I felt in Star Trek, they were brave enough to show that humanity really wasn't fixed, that you can't change our nature, we simply are. Yes, we can socially evolve. Yes, we can come together as a unified people. And we'd shown that individuals amongst humans could still be bad or corrupt or whatever, yes. But we'd never seen a systemic organization that like this. Basically, the last terrorist organization of humans was probably Terra Prime, 200 years earlier. So the Maquis show that despite everything, when pushed, humans can be just as dangerous as any Klingon. It would actually be the Ferengi, specifically Quark, who made this observation about humans, noting that just because we seem all nice and friendly and happy doesn't mean it's not in us. Whereas I actually think in the Ferengi's case, it really isn't. It's not in their nature to become that aggressive. I absolutely think that Quark was correct when he said that the Federation, that humans were jealous of the Ferengi. Because, yeah, they looked down on them, they saw them as weaselly and annoying, but there is no way around the argument that Ferengi culture is more stable, more peaceful, and generally more together, and has had a longer sustained period of peace. The Ferengi don't involve themselves in interstellar conflicts. They stay neutral. They'll get into individual combat, but we do see that if they get too far out of line, they bring their own people to answer for those crimes. Much like the Federation does, but they don't get involved in major wars. They didn't go to war with the Dominion. They don't go to war with the Romulans, the Klingons, or the Federation for that matter. They may threaten it. They may posture, but it is posturing. The Ferengi are not interested in open warfare. So, yeah, they're weaselly, annoying, cowardly little capitalists, but they are, and I hate saying this, a beacon of peace in the Alpha Quadrant. Because they're just interested in making money. They're just interested in being comfortable, having their beetle snuff, drinking their wine, eating some grubs, and enjoying the attention of some pretty women. Because they're a patriarchal society. They're not without their problems. That said, they made an astute observation. And despite all this, we skip forward centuries, and we see with people like Admiral Vance, he's leading Starfleet in military campaigns. Still, despite everything, humanity, Earth leaves the Federation. The United Earth Defense Forces have generals and military structures. They revert back to who they are. Yeah, they stay unified, but that warrior nature in our culture is still there. So I think war is well portrayed in Star Trek, but it often tries to move the danger. It tries to, like with everything in Star Trek, when it tries to make a point, it moves that point outside of humanity and puts it in the camp of somebody else, so that we can look at it through the lens and go, isn't that terrible? That's really horrible how those people are treating each other. They shouldn't just invade that weaker power just because it's on their border and they've got, a bit of space that's near to a nebula that their ships would like to cut through in order to facilitate better trade and access to wider networks. And, this mother state just thinks it can invade this minor little state just because it kind of used to have influence over it one time in the past. It just doesn't translate well when they put it in the view of humans. So they take those two powers and they make one Klingon and they make the other one, I don't know, Ferengi, and they show that conflict and they show humans come in and the Federation comes in and resolves it with peace and diplomacy. And that was the message Roddenberry wanted to always portray. He wasn't necessarily against showing the wars and showing the violence, but he wanted to show that there was a better way to deal with it than just resorting to out-and-out attrition and violence. And as a result, you get this sort of weird human-imposed morality on the entire galaxy, which in and of itself can be construed as a form of imperialism. And there is, again, in case you've never picked up on this, many of the different cultures in Star Trek are reflections of either older Earth cultures that don't exist anymore. Klingons have become increasingly Viking, for example. It's hard to not see the comparison. Romulans are quite clearly the ancient Romans. The Ferengi, as far as I'm concerned, they're corporate America, because they are. And the Dominion, well, it's meant to be a parody of the Federation in and of itself. So they take these concepts and they spread them out into other races, but it is a fascinating way of viewing it. War becomes something that can be a plot contrivance, but it tells you all the time, the consistent message is there is a peaceful way out of this. You just have to be willing to do it and not let certain individuals that are leading these campaigns bully you into believing that it's the right thing to do or it's the honourable thing to do, that violence should only be used to defend yourself or others. And that's a very good message. And I think that's how every war in Star Trek ultimately, pretty much every single conflict, is ultimately gearing towards that notion. And the aggressors, although often get redemption arcs later on down the line, they always try and show that there's more to it. That's a very important key, I think, to this morality tale of warfare in Star Trek. Odo, for example, is a changeling. Changelings are an amoral, extremely selfish, and violently brutal imperialistic culture. But Odo is nothing like that. Of course he's not. He's freaking Odo. He's awesome. But he shows that within the changeling people there is capacity for something else. There's capacity for more, for change, to be better. We see this with many other individuals from other races across the board within Star Trek. Even, I'll use an example of a relatively minor one because there's no major conflicts you can really put from Voyager, but let's use an example of an individual. Ka. Ka was a Kazon warrior. Young, yes, and it was a showing that of child warriors is a bad thing, certainly, child soldiers, but he showed that even within the Kazon, there was the capacity to function more. There was more to them than just violent, mindless savages. He showed and demonstrated a sense of honor, loyalty, and also a strong sense of right from wrong within his, and it was able to critically look at his own people and identify these same problems and strengths, and was able to overcome them. Yeah, ultimately he was still Kazon, but he showed that glimpse that there was more to the Kazon. And that's one of the things they've always done really, really well in the portrayal of warfare throughout Star Trek. As I said, this is just my thoughts spewing out. That's why I'm doing this one as a podcast, because it's not really on any one specific topic. But I wanted to have this thought because I've been watching a lot of Star Trek recently, and actually a friend of mine very recently contacted me out of the blue. I've not spoken to for years, with the most random message telling me I was right about Star Trek Deep Space Nine being the best Star Trek series. And I was like, when the hell did I even say that? I've barely spoken to this dude since college, which was, I'm older than that college age, so it was a long time ago. And it was a conversation we had back in college, and he only recently watched Deep Space Nine and went, yeah. Cisco's awesome. Deep Space Nine is cool. I'm like, I know. Why has this taken you like 20 years or whatever it's been, 15 years, but whatever. I got that out of the blue, and it put this in my head. I was like, you know what? There is something that timeless about the stories. And even though Deep Space Nine, the majority of its story from like season 3 onwards is about a burgeoning conflict to open conflict to resolution of conflict, and we're talking a 5-season long arc pretty much, it's memorable, and it is timeless. And humanity does have a habit of forgetting these lessons, and as Nichelle Nichols had pointed out to Gene Roddenberry all the way back in the 60s, she was the first one to realize what he was writing. He was writing a morality tale. And although many people would argue that Deep Space Nine never would have been made if Roddenberry had been alive, and it probably wouldn't have been, because it's so violent, I think we miss the point that the spirit of Star Trek is still there. The same basic message of Star Trek is still contained within the narrative, and it's not completely lost. Which, again, how warfare is conducted and shown in Star Trek is, I think, very good. And I think it is a good allegory for many of the conflicts and things going on around the world now. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, probably 10 years from now and 20 years from now. And it's true that war is such a messy, pointless affair. I mean, basically it's, let's say, 2 powers, 3 powers, 4 powers going to war with one another, sending young men and women off to die, making their population struggle and go through hardship for many years, probably. All before what is the inevitable resolution of the conflict, where everyone gets together and does the thing that they should have done at the beginning of the conflict anyway, and just talked about it. And it's like you could just skip out the 2 years of killing each other and the propaganda that makes the people of the two belligerents believe that the other human beings on the other side of that forest line, or the other side of that road, or the other side of those mountains, to dehumanize them and believe them to be something worth destroying or neutralizing or conquering, and get rid of that idea and just skip to the bit at the end where we all talk and get past it. And, everyone's a lot happier and not dead. So there's that. Anyway, that's the end of this. I have done this as a podcast format purely so I could go on a ramble. I hope it was not too boring, or I didn't go off on any tangents this time, which is nice. And if you did enjoy, please like, share and subscribe. Comment down below. Also, incidentally, I do have full playlists on both the Xindi and on the Dominion that hopefully I've remembered to link. If I didn't, they are on my channel. You can easily find them. They're full playlists and breakdowns of the conflicts, the belligerents, the powers, some of the battles, other such things. All the somewhere. Go to my channel, find a playlist. Quite fun. With that said, hope you enjoyed this and made it all to the end. Thank you for watching or listening, and bye-bye.